Hi, I'm Tim Munden, former Chief Learning Officer at Unilever and now a coach and consultant in 21st century leadership. Today on the show, we're going to talk about how data shows that there is no conflict between doing deep work on yourself and being a high-performing leader in an organization. How I thought I was pursuing a noble purpose but was actually trying to not die with shame, and how you can take concrete steps to find your purpose and put it at the heart of everything you do, and we'll talk about so much more.
Welcome! In Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, he speaks of the enduring quest for purpose amidst the darkest hours of human history. Frankl argued that pursuing meaning and purpose, even in the most dire circumstances, is a fundamental human drive and is essential for psychological health and personal fulfillment. But what can a corporation and its leaders do to positively implement at an organizational or corporate level? What would happen to an organization when it knows and clearly communicates its meaning, its purpose to its stakeholders? What might be the real impact to an individual within that organization when those individuals know their own purpose? Well, if you've been following my work for any period of time, you know that the fundamental premise of the science behind the emotional source code is rooted in understanding how we form meaning. Our guest today understands better than almost any other human on the planet of how it impacts an organization and how it impacts the people coming into that organization to know their own purpose and meaning. I'll tell you more about our guest, Tim Munden, in just a moment. Welcome to a new episode of the Dov Baron Show. For 16 years, we've aspired to bring you the very best in outstanding thought leaders, deep thinkers, and guests across the board. That's why we've constantly evolved the show. And as you may know, we used to be known as the Leadership and Loyalty Show or even Curiosity Bites. We've combined the two shows together to give you the very best of both worlds. Now you get to step into the world's heartbeat with the Dov Baron Show, where you can come for the stories, but I guarantee you'll stay for the learning. We're excited to have you as part of the community. Every episode offers tantalizing taste of delicious thought, wisdom, global leaders, deep thinkers, entertainers, and a spectrum of the most captivating minds, from astronauts soaring the cosmos to philosophers plumbing the soul's depths. Ready for an odyssey? This is not just another podcast, it's a passport to unparalleled insights. This week, our guest of honor is Tim Munden. Tim is a award-winning former Chief Learning Officer at Unilever. Unilever is a brand with more than 400 other brands under its umbrella. Today, Tim Munden is a coach, speaker, facilitator, and designer of transformational experiences. Tim's purpose is to nurture profound human possibility, and he works with organizations worldwide from all sizes of the sectors to help them get fit for the 21st century of reality. What's more, he ran a methodology for discovering purpose at Unilever, which implemented it across, wait for it, 56,000 employees. We'll talk about the impact of that in the show. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome, turn up the device, make sure you don't miss it, Tim Munden. Woo! Happy to have you here. Very excited about this conversation.
Thank you so much, Dov.
The work you have done is, in my mind, quite profound, and it's had a massive, massive impact. And I want to really come to what that's all about in a moment, but I want to start where I think it's always important to start, which is with you. And that is, what is the origin story of what gives your life meaning? You're the guy behind meaning and purpose for these companies. What is the origin story of what gives your life meaning and purpose?
I think that comes in a three-part story, to be honest. First part, I was raised unusually. My parents in the 1960s found Indian philosophy and spirituality. So meditation and that tradition was part of how I was raised, or the core of how I was raised. In that tradition, there's a fantastic prayer called the Prayer of the Wise. I remember the first time I heard this because it blew me away. It goes like this: may all be happy, may all be free from disease, may all creatures have well-being, and none be in misery of any kind. And I remember hearing that, and it resonated deeply with me. I think that's the deepest sense of my purpose.
Right.
I think the first time I heard that,
I was outside of the traditional, clearly business culture of we've got to win. Right? It's really an everybody's got to win mentality, right? everybody, everything, actually.
Yes. Now, I think the thing about that is that sometimes competing helps people to get better and to have well-being. I've loved playing sport growing up. I'm still a great fan of the game of rugby. And of course, to have the joy of playing, you need competition.
So you said it's a 3-part story. Tell us another part of that story, because that's when you're 12 and you remember things that happened to me when I was very young and the impact of them, but I don't know that they generatively had impact for what I would do after that.
I think that was the foundation almost. The next, what was built on top of that, I decided in my teenage years that I was going to join the armed forces. I joined the army in the UK. They paid for my education, which was a great blessing. But I got injured playing sports, and 22, that was over. I met someone who changed my life by asking me 2 questions. He said, the next career you choose, Tim, ask yourself, what do you love and what do you want to learn about? Because if you follow what you love, you'll be motivated. If you follow what you want to learn about, you're always going to be interested. And I remember thinking, those are fine questions. I was 22. And it took me a couple of weeks of just thinking that through and coming to the conclusion that I love human beings. I can't put any more than that. I love the creativity, the profundity, the richness, and of course the complexity and the broadness of human.
Before we go any further, Tim, I love when there's a contrast and a contradiction, because you and I talked about how life is made up of this beautiful tension. And so here's this prayer for everything being good and everybody being good. And you join the bloody armed forces, which is about killing the enemy at a basic level, right? You're protecting people by killing the others. It seems a little, just a smidge off. Talk to us about how because for me, I think that, we talk about meaning and purpose. It's how do we come to terms with the things that are contradictory in our own lives. So for instance, in an example, I am a meat eater. I was a vegetarian for about 18 months. I've never been sicker or fatter in my life. It doesn't work for my body. But I know that I would starve to death. There was no butcher store, or there was nowhere to buy meat. My wife will vacuum up spiders. I take them outside. I can't kill anything. So it's a complete contradiction. I'm very aware of my own hypocrisy, but I'm okay with it. And it seems like that might have been one with the prayer in the armed forces. Maybe that's my illusion.
Well, I think it's just, by the way, I've been a vegetarian for over 30 years. So for me, it wasn't a contradiction, because my motivation was fight to defend others, to defend those who can't defend themselves. Yeah. So in the core of my purpose is the idea of justice and prosperity. And so justice was what made me feel actually some people have got to be willing to do those difficult things in order that others can live in peace and prosperity. And also to face tyranny, which I think is a narrative once again in our world, isn't it? I'm 53. Obviously, this was the 80s when I made that decision, and the Cold War. We now, again, I think, face tyranny in many places.
So when you put all that together, to ask you this question, why are you here on the planet?
It is, I think, to try and fulfill that intent of that prayer, to try and generate real prosperity and well-being. Think of it, and when I talk to companies, I talk about nurturing that deeply human possibility. Because the systemic crises that we face, climate, in nature, depredation, in intra, of those have their solution in the human being. They are the source of the problem. We are also the source of the solution. I'm fascinated by and driven to try and find in the human beings the capabilities, the insight, the depth which solves those issues. Change is a human problem, driven by our way of living, which is driven by our inner state.
So when you left the armed forces, we're doing this, like you said, you wanted to be willing to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Like I've talked a lot about in my own work about that the greatest addiction of human beings is our identity. And so the military does a very good job of giving people meaning and purpose and identity. The challenge with that is when they leave the armed forces, they often lose that sense of purpose, that sense of meaning, and even the sense of their own identity. What happened for you?
This is two bits to that. One is I feel that actually, although to your point about the contradiction of humans, there was also something else going on in my decision to join the army, which was a search for identity. Struggling with that. The army was a way of getting an identity with respect to my parents and the environment I was in. Was it a career choice? I suspect the universe did the armed forces and myself a massive favour. I got a football tackle that injured me by going, no, go this. But something else then happened. Not long after that, maybe 18 months, I had a car accident, which was terrible, in which I thought I would die. I literally thought I was about to live my last moment and I was going to be decapitated. And in the moment I thought I was going to die, I had this deep sense of shame. I wasted my life, that I'd wasted 20 years. As it is, I didn't die of this car. And in the days that followed, I thought to myself, that was a horrendous experience. Next time I die, I will not have shame. I will fulfill my potential. And I nurtured that in myself. I will fulfill my potential. Use this terrible thing to drive yourself forwards. And I told that story for many years at purpose workshops and leadership programs. And people would say, and I would feel brilliant to use a terrible experience for good. But actually, it got to a point in my 40s where I was numb. I couldn't achieve enough to get rid of this sense of shame. And I was overreacting in the workplace. I had a senior job in Unilever, and I was overreacting. And thankfully, one of my bosses probably served my needs more than any other ever by taking to one side and saying, Tim, you're brilliant. Whenever you say you're going to do something, I never worry about it then because you do it. Just one thing, your emotions are all over. Either things are wonderful and brilliant, or they are awful. And of course, it was when things were going the way I thought they should be going, that's not going to die with shame. When things were not going the way I thought they should be going, I'm going to die with shame. And that was the strength of my emotional reaction. And at the same time, over a period of years, I had started to sleep worse and worse. And it got to the point where 5 nights out of 7, I woke up screaming, dying in my nightmares. Vivid dying in my nightmares. I know people listening will have had this experience. I'm by no means alone in having. And I got to the point of having to admit I've been going on here. I was doing a lot of work on mental health at the time in our company. I heard people starting to talk about traumatic stress. And then one night I was watching a movie, my wife and daughter's film called The Age of Adeline. In this movie, this woman's in a car that turns over. I burst into tears and ran out of the room and thought, even I can draw the dots here. Went and got help, which was remarkably difficult. Forward, did a lot of work, found magnificent psychologists. I got lucky first time and found a fantastic psychologist, found EMDR. The combination of EMDR and meditation I found extremely powerful. And been doing some work through Unilever with the foundation of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and the Duke of Sussex, obviously now the Prince and Princess of Wales, and they were running a campaign on mental health called Heads Together, which Unilever was supporting, and they asked me to make a film about my experience, get senior leaders in businesses to speak absolutely rightly. Recently have really good data on the fact that does work. It lifts stigma, allows other people to speak and just speak enough to go get the help. So I found myself the night before World Mental Health Day with my finger on the post button, about to post this film on LinkedIn. Once I've pushed that button, this never goes away. This never goes. I'm pushing the button and being blown away by what happened. Thousands of people watch the film, and I don't know thousands of people, unlike you, who definitely knows thousands of people. I did. From then on, my relationships with people around me had changed. I showed up raw as I am. And I think I have started the journey of recovering from the belief that I need to achieve in order to be valued. That third step, I think, has helped me with the sense of power, vulnerability, and authenticity in unlocking potential, but also the depth to which we have to work in our current cultural environment. Understand that achievement is not necessary to have value and validity. It's so deeply programmed into us. And I think it holds us back, because coming back to what drives the problems in the world, part of it is that deep need to validate us.
We live in a world that is commercially driven, it's highly competitive, and we are rewarded for our achievements. None of those things are bad, but if they're indoctrinated, they're terrible. So what happens is we develop, and depending on one's childhood as well, because this is certainly a major factor, we develop what in psychology we call love by production. We think we're only lovable because we produce, and therefore our value is in what we produce. Now, is producing important? Of course it is, because you want to be an active member of society, and you don't want to be a bump on a log, and you want to have a life that actually means something to you. Those things are true, but if that's always externally referenced, then it becomes very empty very fast. When you said that and you can totally say that you don't want to go to that, it's okay. But when you said that you felt shame at 22, a sense of dying in the shame, and you never got rid of the shame, was that the shame of not having, quote, achieved what you felt you should have achieved before you die? Or was it something else altogether?
I think it was sense of things not being good and not being good enough. And what I've realized in the deeper leadership development work that we do is often both those things are playing. They're different things, but often they're both playing in leaders. I found them playing in myself. The sense of being good and not being good. What those then do, I think, is to create this external referencing. You're then trying to find ways of becoming good.
Right.
And I think instead the journey is to go further inwards. So for me, we talked about purpose. I think purpose is massively important.
Yes.
But there's a further journey into ourselves, which is a journey into awareness. The I am is also a vital journey in human and, I think, leadership terms.
We're in 21st century. We're almost at the end of the first quarter of the 21st century. And it's my view, it's not the truth, it's my view that in many ways we are still living in the industrial age mentally, certainly as far as corporations are concerned. We have a military mindset, which is what leadership is based on. It's not necessarily community-based. And we're seeing a shift in that, but we're also seeing that many leaders are severely struggling with understanding this because they were brought up, they were educated in a, I'm the leader, I'm in charge. Now, you and I can philosophize and agree fully, I'm certain, that we need to do leadership differently. That's still a massive struggle. And the challenge is, what I'm noticing is that when I look at millennials and even Gen Z, what I see is that they were educated by Gen Xers and baby boomers about what leadership is. So they're dragging that history into the present. What do you see as 21st century leadership?
So when I started my career, the archetype of a leader looked ruffled or panicky, always had the answer, never made mistakes. You show up like that now, people think, so you never make mistakes. You're not trying difficult enough stuff, not experimenting. You're not ruffled. Or frankly, either you don't know what's going on or I don't believe it anyway. And it all sounds rather privileged. And who is underneath this facade anyway? And this shift in vulnerability, in the need for transparency is 180 degrees. Now, of course, moments as a leader when you have to give the sense of confidence and not look ruffled, of course that's true. But it's one of a number of leadership approaches. That shift to the willingness to be uncertain, to not have rush to the answer, to be at ease with your uneasiness, to be vulnerable, that takes a deep, what we call inner game. So what we started to do at Unilever was talk about the inner game and the outer game. And what you do, inner game, your being, who you are. That inner game of our being is more on show than ever before now, because we want a different relationship with leaders. Because they want to know who the leader is, who are they following? They want a relationship in which the leader helps to coach, to help them find meaningful work. The inner is now on show. People don't want to be led by someone in an office with a door and a job title, and that's the relationship. Yeah, they want a relationship. The inner game is on show. So I think that the shift we're making is no difference for human beings. Human beings have always worked from the inside out. But now, to be effective as a leader, you have to develop more of those capabilities and bring them out. What are they? I think of them as awareness, purpose, and personal mastery. And a strong component of personal mastery is personal agility. Those capabilities are now the make or break, the foundation on which everything you do has to rest. That, I think, is a shift that enables 21st century leadership, which is a leadership which enables solutions that are good for all, not just good for your organization and a whole lot of other harms to your model. It's a model that thinks holistically of business and of organization.
I agree with everything you're saying. So my pushback isn't from there. My pushback is from this place of everything you said is right, and leaders are shit at change. They're actually wonderful at change at an organizational level, but not at a personal level and not at a command and control level. So that's what I'm trying to understand, because I know you deal with a lot. I mean, you worked for Unilever, which has been around how long?
Well over 100 years.
Right. So well over 100 years, obviously deeply ingrained in an old system of leadership that transformed into something very different, to something that actually took the importance of purpose and meaning and all the other things and said, okay, this needs to go not just for us, this needs to go for everybody who works for us. And I'm going to talk more about that in the second part and talk about the impact of that in the second part. When you are brought in and all the leaders sit around nodding and going, oh, this is a great idea, I imagine, because I know I deal with it, I imagine that you still bump up against, yeah, that's good and we should do that, as long as I don't have to. As I always say, people love change as long as they don't have to.
Yes, exactly. And change is something that's best done to other people. But here's the unlock. The kind of leadership we're describing, in the same way as the kind of organizations we're describing, are more human. Not less human, more human. So the reason this works, and it does work, is because what we're doing is saying, you as a human being have awareness, you are awareness, you are purpose. And those things together help to give you the power to be masterful over yourself and your own behavior. You don't have to bring anything else in. All that stuff is there. It's already there. We're working with human nature in this work, in the sense that every human being has awareness, has purpose. And that's why I think this is a different leadership movement to many leadership movements that have happened before, which has been about, you need to learn this new methodology, this new system. And actually, what we're saying is, no, you just need to discover what's truly within yourself. And that will help you to lead more effectively, to be more fluid, less emotionally booked. It'll enable you to make better connections, better decisions. Your organization will perform better. And that's what we're after. There is no trade-off between humanity and performance. And I think we know this because let's look at the opposite. When you see organizations which are heavily controlled, it is usually because the leaders have a belief that unless you put people under pressure, they won't perform, which is absolutely the industrial model. People as widgets. And then organizations become like factories, or we use machine kind of metaphors, and there we go. Rather than using nature and the wilderness as metaphors. In all my kind of materials, website, everything, I put pictures of nature because that is our ultimate ecosystem, and that is what an organization most truly resembles. So I think, to answer your question, the reason this works is because the invitation to us all is know yourself better, more deeply. Do your work on yourself, and your leadership will flourish as a result, and your people will flourish. And that, I think, is the difference.
So going a little further, let's imagine that the Tim we're sitting with right now goes back in time to before that boss said to you, you're great, you're integral, but you're all over the shop. Let's take you back to 2 years before that. And this Tim goes to talk to that Tim and says exactly what you just said to me. What's his pushback?
Show me. So what was happening for me was I was not aware of my own pain. I didn't realize how much pain I was in. And that's despite the fact that I've been meditating since I was 11 years old. I was still programmed So I think it's the progressive awakening to what's happening within us, the sense of pain, where it's pinching. And so what I find now in the leadership development work that I do is we're using some very different language and different methodology. Some of the work that I do is helping to prepare the next generation of C-suite leaders. So you can imagine coaching, when you're doing deep inner shift, coaching doesn't always work. You meet the leader once a month for 90 minutes or 2 hours, and you're trying to do some deep identity. And the leader's been working between the times that you saw them, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. It's very difficult to get back to that same conversation again. So compress it. Take the leader away on their own, 2-3 coaches, all focused around that person, deeply immersive journey. That's the kind of methodology I think we're starting to work with to try and engender that shift. Deep, customized immersions. Sometimes using Jungian shadow work. You were obviously a Jungian therapist in your previous life, I understand. So you'll know the power of that methodology as a way of getting people to try and look at the things that they've decided are not acceptable. Going back to some of the wounding. So we're starting to use those kinds of methodologies and trying to do that at a decent scale in order to help unlock awareness and generate shift. All of it working with the flow of nature from awareness outwards rather than trying to force or suppress, which I think is the source of a lot of the issue.
But at the same time, you know as well as I, most people who are living in that high performance, high productivity, highly competitive world, even the mention of something that sounds vaguely similar to a therapeutic process of self-discovery is like, yeah, I'm not going there. That's for nutters. Right? Look at me. I've got a Rolls Royce and I've got a yacht and I've got a XYZ because they're living in that world you talked about right at the beginning of the show, which my validation is my successes, not my inner journey at all. And as you know, many leaders will avoid going inner. I know my private clients are the people who have made all of those successes and have finally had to face the fact that they're an identity crisis of this is not working. But that often, as you know, usually takes something extremely painful, i.e. a car crash, falling off a mountain in my case, a bankruptcy, the loss of a loved one, some devastating moment. And you and I are trying to bring this to leadership without saying, yeah, you've got to fall off the cliff first.
Yeah.
But a lot of them, even when they fall off the bloody cliff, are resistant. That's what I'm pushing back because I'm trying to understand for the listener listening in going, yeah, this sounds great, but I'm really courageous in all kinds of things, but the idea of doing that's beyond the pale.
Yes. So look, I think the data is racking up on why the current leadership models and the current organizational philosophies are not working for anyone. They're not working for the people in them. They're not working for the investors necessarily. They're not necessarily working for the wider society. So I think the point, and a lot of what I guess you do and what I do with clients is helping to look at the information, go, what is working here and what do you need to shift?
Right.
And so unless we understand that a failure to address sustainability spells the end of these businesses that we know, unless we understand that, then you can kid yourself that the model's got life in it, but this model doesn't have longevity.
All right. I fully agree. Tim, this is an amazing convo, and I'm really grateful to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Before we go any further, because we're going to come back for part 2 of the show, I want to make sure that people know where they can find out more about you, about your work in all the different areas. I know you've got a bunch of resources, so please let people know where they can find out more about you.
Yes, so they can find out more about me, obviously on LinkedIn, and there's films and there's podcasts and there's things like that and articles. And on my website, chironleadership.com, find out more about what we do and how we do it.
And of course, we'll make sure that we post all the links to all the places you can reach out to Tim, of course, in the show notes and wherever you see a promotion for it, we'll make sure that you can reach out to Tim. I encourage you to do so, particularly if you're looking at the value of really finding the purpose of your organization in a different way. We're going to talk more about that in part 2 of the show. We're going to talk about bringing it to an organization, like I said, of 57,000 people, and what might be the impact of that, and how might that impact engagement and commitment and loyalty to your organization. because a lot of what we spoke about in part one might seem philosophical. But let's get down to, as Tim was just saying, the data, the impact when we come back in part two of the show. Till then, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about what's going on in the shadow of your being, what's going on in the shadow of the being of your organization, and how could you serve at a much greater level inside of your organization. We're going to be back in just one click, so stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.